Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use a circular saw, also known as a skill saw. I'm going to show you safety, the different parts, and then about 6 different cuts you can make with this tool. So let's go over the parts of the skill saw. The first one right here is your upper blade guard and your lower blade guard. That should be in good working order. It should retract and it should spring back into place after it does retract. On the front side, you have your blade lock. Okay, if you are changing your blade, you would have to push in that blade lock. You have your bevel. Okay, you'll flip that bevel over if you are adjusting for a bevel cut. You have your second handle. Definitely should be used when you are making especially rip cuts. Okay, you get your trigger. You have your wrench for changing the blade. Okay, you have your blade depth adjustment right here, so you can flip that up right there and it will adjust the depth of your cut. Okay, and then finally you have your base, which should be flat on your material when you are cutting. When you pick up a circular saw, there's a series of safety checks you want to make before you actually start cutting. The first thing is make sure you have safety glasses. Next thing is check the cord to make sure there's not any nicks or cuts in it. If there is, put some electrical tape on it. Now you're ready to make your cut. The first thing you want to do when you're adjusting your saw is you want to adjust the blade depth. To do that, you flip this lever up, okay, and you can adjust the base for different depths. Sometimes there's a kind of a measuring tape right here that you can use as a guide, but you want to adjust it to where the blade is a 1/4 inch below the material. Make sure that you lock that into place, and now you're ready to make your cut. Okay, next you'll set up your board. When you set up your board, make sure that your board can, the excess you're cutting off can fall freely. Okay, if it cannot fall freely, if you put your board in between two sawhorses and you're cutting in the middle of the sawhorse, then it's going to pinch the blade between the two boards because the excess you're cutting off cannot fall freely and it's going to pinch back. Okay, also make sure you stand off to the side. Don't stand directly behind the saw. If you stand directly behind the saw and something does happen where it kicks back, it's going to hit you, but if you stand off to the side, it's going to come past you. Now that you got all that lined up, you're ready to make your cuts. My cross cut's going to be across the grain. Go draw you a straight line with your speed square, and then you'll adjust the depth of your skill saw. You'll flip that lever up on the back side, and then you'll adjust it to where the blade's a 1/4 inch below. So now you're ready to make your cut. You want to kind of look through this little space in the saw that I'll show you, and you got your 0 mark right there. You have it on the top and bottom of the base, so you can use either one. And take note of where the kerf is at. The kerf is what the material that the blade takes out of the board. So your kerf should be on the waist side of the material, and then you just make your cut standing off to the side. The next cut is a bevel cut. I don't usually draw my line like this. You just draw a straight line like a cross cut, but I draw this line on the thickness of the board just to show you how a bevel cut is, how it's going to be cut. When you make a bevel cut, you have to flip that lever up and you put it on the degree of the bevel. And once you get that set up, you can adjust your depth. Your depth has to be a little bit deeper than a 1/4 inch of the thickness of the board because your blade is at an angle. So you probably want to go about 3/8 deeper than the thickness of your material to make that cut. When you line it up, I'm pointing right there at the base. There's a 45 mark. If you're cutting on a 45-degree bevel, you will want to line the blade up with that mark and then make your cut. Make sure that your blade is on the waist side of your board. The next cut is going to be a MiterCut. It's very similar. You just draw a miter or an angle with you across the width of the board. Now, as you notice here, I'm lining it up. As you can see, I'm kind of going back and forth just to show you that I like to line it up with the base first, and then I use the blade. The next cut is a compound. A compound is just a bevel and a miter together. So you lay it out just like you would a MiterCut. You have to adjust the depth of your saw. It's going to be a little bit deeper than usual because you have to adjust it just like a bevel, and then you'll adjust the base to a bevel cut to whatever degree you're doing a compound. In this scenario, I'm doing a 22.5 by 22.5, so I got a 22.5 miter and a 22.5 bevel. So you'll line it up just like we did with a miter, and you'll cut it just like you'll cut a miter and a bevel, just following your line there. And as you can see, the width has an angle, and so does the thickness of your board. So you have, next cut is a plunge cut. The plunge cut would be useful when you are maybe installing plywood or sheathing. You want to line up your base first, and then this is the only cut where you have to raise the lower blade guard. So you'll raise that lower blade guard up, you'll start the blade, and then you'll bring the saw blade down into the wood. So like I said, raise that lower blade guard up, get the base lined up on the front, then look over and make sure the saw blade's lined up, and then you'll start the saw and just bring the blade down into your cut line. Once you can go backwards and forwards. After you make your 4 cuts on each side, like I'm doing a rectangle right here, you can get a jigsaw. I got a handsaw right here, and I'm just kind of taking out the rest. You don't want to punch the board through because it'll chip out that plywood, and it will be a nice smooth cut. Alright, the next cut is you are going to be notching a board. So this is like if you're notching a post. You draw your first cutout just like you would draw a crosscut. You want to adjust the depth of your saw. I'm gonna notch this board half the thickness. So there's a 2x4, so it's 1.5 inches. So I'm gonna notch it to 3/4 of an inch. Your first cut on here must be perfect. Just start running through here and cutting little grooves into the board. You want your cuts about 1/8 of an inch apart, and that way when you knock out what's left, it just kind of falls. If you have it if your cuts are more than 1/8 of an inch apart, then it's going to be difficult to knock out all the little pieces of wood in between your saw curves. So after you make all of your notches, the main thing is make sure the base stays flat. You don't want to raise it up, especially on the end of the cut, because you have that tendency to kind of push through and raise the saw up, and then you can just take a hammer and knock all those out, and you'll have a perfectly notched